Long before the internet became a platform to display the bizarre idiosyncratic exploits of human behavior, there was a man by the name of Robert Ripley. And you may know him better as the eccentric founder of the worldwide museum chain Ripley's Believe It or Not. Mr. Ripley built a multi-million-dollar empire in the 1940s as an oddity hunter, traveling the world looking for the people, places, and events that made up the stranger side of humanity. Bearded ladies, dogs with one eye, people that stood over 8 feet tall, and those who had unexplainable abilities that resembled more of an X-Men script than a real-life person. Like people with superhuman strength, fireproof skin, infinite pain tolerances, rubber bones, and someone who could drink 61 bottles of ranch dressing in an hour. Whatever it was, Mr. Ripley had one goal, and that was to deliver to the masses the most unbelievable oddities that existed on planet Earth. Oddities that were so outrageous that at first glance one would question their sheer legitimacy. Consider him like the world's first clickbait artist. But the interesting thing about Mr. Ripley is that he never asked anyone to believe him. He simply told you the story and left you with an ultimatum at the end, which has now become Ripley's famous tagline, "Believe it or not." And while Mr. Ripley never focused on anything motorcycle related, if he did, at the very top of his list would have to be the unbelievable oddity of Bultaco Motorcycles, a company that was born out of sabotage by a free-spirited, unorthodox entrepreneur who was sold out by his own family members that he gave jobs to. A company that was forced to operate under a totalitarian dictatorship during a civil war in Spain, who built their first bike in a barn and designed the engine for it in a converted outhouse while finagling a manufacturing license under questionable circumstances. A company that would forget to ship a race bike to one of its factory riders, forcing him at the last second to borrow a Bultaco from a fan in the stands, and somehow in the process, not only did he win the race, but he became the first American rider to do so. And if that's not bizarre enough for you, Bultaco would be betrayed by its own government, pushed to the brink by an oil crisis, and then become the victim of a terrorist attack. Yet in spite of all of this, they somehow successfully competed against the very company that sabotaged them and built motorcycles that were so good and advanced they would revolutionize an entire sport. That is, until eventually being overthrown by their employees that caused the board of directors to just walk out one day and never return, only to come back and, well, let me save that part for later. Because this is the odd story of how a charismatic, well-loved, forward-thinking racing enthusiast by the name of Francesco Javier Bulto built the iconic and once dominant brand that we know as Bultaco Motorcycles, only to have a string of unfortunate, poorly timed incidents that are so outrageous. At the end of this video, you will be left with the very same ultimatum that Mr. Ripley gave to everyone, and that is to believe it or not. Now, before I get into today's video, I'm sorry for the repetitive footage, or footage that may not always match up to my commentary. Trying to find mass quantities of non-copyrighted, relevant footage from time periods in excess of 40 years, quite frankly, is a pain in the rear, so use your imagination. Today's story begins in Spain in 1944 with two main protagonists. The first is a man by the name of Pere Pimenir, and I certainly hope I'm pronouncing that right. And for the remainder of the video, I'll just refer to him as Pere, who was an engineer born into a family of business and one who had a natural penchant for prosperous pursuits. And at the time, he was pivoting his gas generator business towards the development of two-stroke motorcycle engines in order to solve Spain's post-World War II transportation crisis. But Pere was not a true motorcyclist. He was just simply a businessman that was trying to seize an opportunity. And by a chance meeting that was arranged by one of Pere's employees that the internet refers to as Hasu, who just so happens to be the brother-in-law of our second and most important protagonist of today's story, a man by the name of Francesco Javier Bulto, also known as Paco Bulto, or Don Paco, or just plain old Bulto. Bulto was the polar opposite of Pere, where Pere was in it for the money, Bulto was a purebred motorcycle racing enthusiast, and the two decided to combine forces. And with the cash infusion of Pede and the moto mind of Bulto, they create a company we know as Montesa that made street bikes like the A45 and a 125cc racer that competed in the Isle of Man. So right from the start, Montesa was a successful and competitive brand in Spain. And in the early years of Montesa, it seemed that the combination of Pede's business savvy along with Bulto's moto mind that they had created a winning formula. But that formula wouldn't last. Sometimes conflicting personality traits in business can be very beneficial. It can be like a yin and a yang, where each plays into the strengths of the other and creates these magical moments. But it seems that it's inevitable under this matchup that eventually ego and power takes over, and that relationship starts to spiral into the realm of toxicity. And that would be the case for Pede and Bulto. Bulto, being a racer first and a brand owner second, believed that the way to sell bikes was directly through racing. In fact, he had a saying that the market follows the checkered flag, sort of our version of win on Sunday, sell on Monday. Now, Pede, not being a motorcycle fanatic, seen Montesa's racing efforts as a money-sieving endeavor to scratch the addictive racing itch of Bulto. And this was further exacerbated when, according to a 2017 interview with Bulto's son Ignacio, not this Ignacio, Bulto's nephews, who he secured jobs for at the Montesa factory, went to Pede and told them that Bulto was bleeding the company dry with his racing budget, and in an act of disrespect and deceit, rather than confront Bulto and come to some compromise for the greater good of Montesa, the board of directors voted to end Montesa's racing efforts while Bulto was traveling on a business trip to America. So when Bulto returns to Spain, he's not only informed that his nephews, who he was kind enough to provide gainful employment to in an economically depressed Spanish dictatorship, sold him out, but the board of directors of the company that he created robbed him of his sole existence in life, which was to race motorcycles, while he was traveling in America securing deals to help Montesa for the future. Damn! While the board of directors and members of his own family must have had their issues with Bulto, the employees didn't. He was apparently a very charismatic guy who took a genuine interest into the lives of the people who worked for him. And this is where we'll meet our third protagonist of today's story, a man by the name of Joan Chalamon. And I hope I'm not butchering that pronunciation up too badly. Joan was a production manager of Montesa and a supporter of Paco Bulto. And he suggested to Bulto that you do not need this Montesa crap. Let's grab a few of the good workers here and go out and start another company. And Bulto agrees to this. So he severs his interests in Montesa to go out and make his own motorcycles. And this is where things start to become bizarre. Before they're able to start manufacturing motorcycles in Spain, there was a law that didn't allow the granting of manufacturing license for motorcycles unless the annual production was going to be at least 25,000 units. And since Bultaco hasn't even built a motorcycle yet, and isn't even called Bultaco at this point, this seems unreasonable. And the only option left for them was to try and associate with a manufacturer who already has a license. And they would find one, a motorcycle manufacturer that was called Montfort, and they had a license to manufacture Alu bikes. But this company was mega trash in Spain, and they were swimming in the seas of failure. But somehow Paco Bulto would work his charisma and eventually convince its owner, Mr. Montfort, to accept his proposal, which he eventually did. And both sides at the time were happy with that agreement, and Bultaco began to take form, if that's what you want to call it. Since they have very little money at the time, they decide to start the factory in an old farmhouse at San Adrian de Besós, on the northern outskirts of Barcelona. But that's not the weirdest part. Many of the employees lived far away from the farmhouse, so they left their families behind and lived and worked on that farm and slept basically wherever they could sleep. The designers set up their offices in the barn's outhouses. Half of their production machinery was sitting outside in the elements, covered only by a tin roof or no roof at all. And since the farmhouse's headquarters was absent of modern-day conveniences that you and I take for granted, like heating, air conditioning, hot water, stable plumbing, comfy roller chairs, 3D computer mock-up animations, this is a hardcore working environment. But in spite of all that, the very first Bultaco prototype 125 was completed on October 3rd of 1958, exactly 4 months after the design team started working on it. That evening, Mr. Bulto rode the machine for 40 miles out in the country, and it was a very proud moment for him. Now that the final version of the Bultaco 125 is completed, it's time to produce this masterpiece. So they call a press conference to announce this very proud moment of this groundbreaking machine, only to realize they forgot something, like to name the company. So when in doubt, you do what most European brands seem to do, like BMW, Cagiva, Maiko, Baymoda, and that is to go acronym crazy. So they take Bulto's surname, Bulto, and combine it with his nickname, Paco, and that becomes Bultaco. Clever. Now when it comes to their iconic thumbs up logo, this was something that Paco Bulto came up with on his own, and he got it from British riders who would give the thumbs up signal as they flashed through the pit area, signifying that all was well with their motorcycles. And while a bit quirky, it is kind of iconic at this point. And while each and every one of us are free to make our own judgments about that logo, that's where it came from. Anyway, they now have a name and a trademark, and with that, Bultaco releases the 1958 Trojan 101. It was a 125cc small capacity two-stroke machine for road use. But don't let that fool you. As you've already gathered from this story, you know as well as I do that the Trojan 101 is a gateway drug to Bulto's racing. And just 2 months later, Bultaco entered its first Spanish Grand Prix with a racing version that was called the TSS. However, what should have been a proud moment for Paco Bulto quickly turns sour when he realizes that none other than Montesa, the company that he built, that were vehemently against his money-sieving racing efforts and purposely run him out of his own empire, decided, guess what? We're going to continue racing now. Damn! Anyway, Bultaco would have a great showing their first race weekend, taking 7 out of the first 10 places and apparently losing out on victory by a minuscule 6 inches. But do you want to know who they lost those 6 inches to? Yeah, Montesa. Damn! Obviously that had to sting, but it wouldn't take long for Bulto to get his revenge. Just 1 week later in Zaragoza, they would win in a rain-soaked race. And this gave Bultaco the street cred they needed to start selling motorcycles and compete head-to-head with its new arch-nemesis Montesa, but not so fast. Now, it's not clear if Montesa was angry over the success of Bultaco, or this is just business as usual, or a combination of both, but Montesa files a claim against Bultaco and Juan, claiming that the engine that Bultaco was using was designed by Juan while he was employed at Montesa. Now, in spite of my best attempts to research the conclusion of this topic, I was unable to find a definitive answer to the outcome. So if by chance you know the answer to this, please list it down there in the comments section. In 1960, looking to establish themselves even more, Bultaco broke 5 world speed records with the Bultaco 175. This display or publicity stunt, whatever you want to call it, allowed them to grow even faster and brought them national attention. Bultaco would continue to go head-to-head in a fierce racing rivalry with Montesa over the next several years in the Spanish championships. But because of Bultaco's racing success, Bulto was right. The market did follow the checkered flag, and they sold a lot of motorcycles and eventually moved into a new factory and continued to build a series of road machines based off of the success of Trojan, like a Trojan 102, a 155, a 200, and a series of different displacement TSS machines that had immense success under riders like Ginger Malloy and Tommy Robb. While Bultaco's roots lie in road racing, what would happen next would forevermore change the industry. For every motorcycle manufacturer, there's that one motorcycle that defines who they are and what they ultimately become. And for Bultaco, that would come in the form of an off-road machine called the Sherpa. As I mentioned in many of my past videos where the subject matter revolves around 1960s and 1970s motorcycling culture, in those days the passion for off-road motorcycling was rapidly growing, but there were very few dedicated out-of-the-box off-road machines. So motorcycle riders would buy street-based models and put dirt bike tires on them, raised exhausts and wider handlebars, and they would call them scramblers, and that's where that discipline was formed. Much like when riders decided to put street tires on a dirt bike, they created supermoto. Remember, it's all in the tires. Unlike the heavier British bikes that were being used in trials at the time, the Bultaco Sherpa was exceptionally small and light. It utilized a simple frame and a small two-stroke single-cylinder engine. The Sherpa was designed to offer exceptional ground clearance, and it was highly maneuverable. The two-stroke engine punched well above its weight, and when all these factors were combined, the new Bultaco Sherpa proved to be an unbeatable machine. And since the market always follows the checkered flag, Bultaco sold a metric ton of Sherpas, so much so that the born and bred lifelong racing enthusiast Francesco Javier Bulto decides in 1963 to throw most of the company's resources towards off-road machines. Now up to this point, even though Bultaco is a race-winning brand and very reputable, they're virtually unknown outside of Spain. And with the success of the Sherpa, this opens the door for Bultaco to enter the United States market. So in 1963, they import the Model 3 Sherpa S200 to the United States. Immediately upon its arrival, the Bultaco has success on flat tracks, TTs, scramblers, and trials. And this firmly establishes Bultaco as the bike that you need if you want to go out and win, and they become a force to be reckoned with. On the back of the success of the Sherpa in 1964, Bultaco makes the Matador 200, which is basically an enduro racer that came equipped with a headlight and turn signals, making it street legal. So not only was Bultaco single-handedly responsible for reinventing the sport of trials, they pretty much created the very first dual sport motorcycle. Their meteoric rise to off-road immortality would increase in 1965, when they hired famous Irish trials rider Sammy Miller. Miller approached Bultaco about building a new kind of trials bike, which they would ultimately develop and would later be produced as the Sherpa T Sammy Miller. Miller was so impressed with this bike, he had it written into his contract that if he didn't win 50% of all the races he entered on the Bultaco, they didn't have to pay him. And he did. He won more like 80% of the races. Miller would go on to win the Scottish 6 Days Trial in 1965 on his Bultaco Sherpa. He then won again in 1967 and 1968. Now back in those days, the 6 Days competition was the benchmark of attrition and will, and just finishing that race was a victory within itself. But winning the race sold you a lot of motorcycles and established you as an off-road powerhouse. It's much like the Ayrsburg Rodeo or the Romaniacs races of today. The unassuming little Sherpa would dominate its much larger rivals in the World Trial Championships in the 1970s. It would win the title 8 times, and it would win the Scottish 6 Days Trial 4 times in total. For the remainder of the late 60s to early 70s, Bultaco has it all. Road racing championships, off-road domination, and they're producing fresh new models regularly, like the El Bandito, the Campera, and the ultra-iconic Matisse, plus many more. Everything for Bultaco Enterprises seems to be working. They're selling out of every motorcycle that they make, and even Barry Sheen is racing your motorcycles. I mean, what could go wrong? Well, actually quite a bit. In fact, Bultaco would fall from grace just about as fast as Disney is right now. As we enter the early 1970s, while Bultaco is killing it in the races and sales department, they're getting killed by their employees, who are fed up over the insane working conditions at the factory. I mean, we already know that the machinery is outside on the farm grass, and engineers are designing motors in converted poop houses, but the heat inside of the factory was described as insufferable by the workers, so bad that employees began to lash out, demanding better working conditions. This would ignite an all-out battle between the owners and the workers. But remember, Spain at this time is being ruled by a dictator, and most unions are not allowed. So management made very little improvements towards those working conditions, and little was done to calm the turmoil between owner and employee. In 1971, an in-house employee newsletter titled Crazy Horse was circulated to start a coup against the management. That led to acts of silent sabotage like failure to meet deadlines, lack of work detail, and just skipping work altogether. Because of this, Bultaco could not meet the demand of their vendors. And when you start slapping motorcycles together at the last minute by employees that hate you, well, you're going to have quality control issues. And things would get worse for Bultaco when the US oil crisis hit and the American economy weakened. When you combine that with the Japanese manufacturers who are now operating with the speed of an army of ants, Bultaco's sales in the United States have come to a screeching halt. But by now you probably figured out that Paco Bulto isn't the kind of guy that's just going to back down without a fight. So he decides to dance with the one that's brought him, and he ups the ante in racing. He would sign United States motorcycling legend Jim Pomeroy and Tony Elias, not this Tony Elias, but his father, to race motocross bikes. And in 1973, Pomeroy would make history as the first American rider to win a European Grand Prix. And in one of the craziest stories that you may ever hear, in 1975, Pomeroy would be the first American to win a Trans-AMA event when he won the race on a stock Bultaco motorcycle that he borrowed from a spectator at the event because his factory bike was delayed in shipping from Europe. I mean, this would be like Eli Tomac showing up at Southwick without a motorcycle and he borrows your bone stock YZ450 and goes out and win the race. I mean, how bizarre is that? And this is just kind of how they threw it down in the 1970s. While astonishing of a feat that this further adds to the Bultaco racing heritage and legacy, the legend of Bultaco. There's a Spanish saying that goes, "Las desgracias nunca vienen solas," which means misfortunes never come alone. And Bultaco is about to experience some of the worst misfortunes you may have ever heard of. Now, we already know the employees are losing their minds and the oil crisis has set them back in a big way. But in 1975, General Franco, the Spanish dictator, dies. And now Spain is entering a time of democracy, which means unions are now legal. And workers begin to strike and protest. They even decide to lock themselves in the factory in attempts to get better working conditions. These internal problems would be the reason that Bultaco was not able to bring to market some of the great models that were expected that year. But the drama doesn't stop there, because in 1976, Paco Bulto has suffered his first heart attack that sidelines him for a while. And in one of the most horrendous hands that can ever be dealt to any human, the following year his brother is kidnapped, then killed in an attempt to extort money. At this point, Bultaco is on borrowed time. Decreasing sales, employee unrest, savage unions, massive amounts of debts, and Paco Bulto's deteriorating health conditions. You add that with the horrific loss of his brother, one can't blame Paco for having a what the f*** attitude at this point. This business has given him the most extreme highs along with the most extreme lows. In November of that year, an agreement would be reached between the suppliers and workers. But the following month, neither the payroll or their Christmas bonuses would be paid out. Now, eventually they would be rescued with government funds to pay the payroll, but the calm wouldn't last for very long. Because in January, the leadership just abandons the factory. They walked out and never came back, leaving the employees there, and Joan Chalamanche has to take the reins. Since Juan was there from the beginning, he knows Bultaco doesn't have any money right now. So he went to the United States to try to find an entrepreneur who would partner up with Bultaco, but was unable to secure one. However, though, not all was lost, because during this time, Honda, Suzuki, and Puch Austria all made offers to buy Bultaco, but the workers' unions turned all of them down. They wanted solid guarantees, but assuming buyers were nervous about the company and government tensions. And it got to the point where the unions would rather see Bultaco sink like the Titanic than to surrender to another manufacturer. And that's exactly what they did. And in 1979, Bultaco and the dream that Francesco Javier Bulto dedicated his life to had come to an end. It's a common behavioral trait for all of us at some point to try to rekindle the past, to bring back to life a product and image with a rich history. And over the last 40 plus years, the Bultaco name has been passed around more than a cheap date at a keg party. In 1980, the Spanish government, along with the help of Derby and none other than their arch nemesis Montesa, tried to step in to save Bultaco, but the workers refused. So they closed again in 1983. From there, Spanish manufacturers Piaggio would step in and use the Bultaco brand name on some of their small capacity machines, but eventually they would terminate that agreement with Bultaco. In 1998, rights to the Bultaco name were purchased by a man named Mark Tessier, and I hope I'm pronouncing that one right as well, who used it to help launch a range of purpose-built trials motorcycle from his company that we know now as Sherco. And this is where the European acronym naming handbook comes in once again, as Sherco gets its name, which is short for Sherpa and Company. The agreement to use the Bultaco name, however, terminated when Sherco wanted to produce smaller capacity trials machines from 80 to 300 cc's. In 2005, Bultaco emerges in the most unlikely of scenarios with lifestyle clothing t-shirts. And that didn't last either. In fact, Bultaco once made a series of refrigerators, and in May of 2014 it was announced that the Bultaco name would be further revived by a man named Juan Manuel Viñas. And he wanted to brand a series of electric-powered motorcycles, even making this Bultaco electric Raptian concept. And as of today, I'm sure at this very moment, somebody somewhere is trying to revive this cult brand somehow, but can't get it going. Bultaco played a big part in I didn't know that history, starting with riders that I've already mentioned, Jim Pomeroy, Tony Elias, Sammy Miller, and Barry Sheen. But they also had Angel Nieto, Martin Lampkin, father to Trials legend Dougie Lampkin, Guy Cooper, and MotoGP legend Sete Gibernau is the grandson of Paco Bulto himself. Peter Fonda also rode a Persang in the famed motorcycle movie Easy Riders. Now I'm sure there are many other riders that have fleeted my aging memory, but that's a laundry list of legendary names. Except for Fonda, he's an actor. When I think about Francesco Javier Bulto, I think about a man with a singular focus, that when he locked in on a goal, he was so hell-bent on achieving it that many of the small things in his life got overlooked, because all of his brain power was channeled in one direction. And this would explain things like building a motorcycle from scratch in 4 months, then realizing that you forgot to name your company. And maybe during these times he was pushing so hard to meet manufacturing deadlines that he overlooked simple working conditions for his employees. And I'm sure all of us can relate to this, since at one time or the other in our lives we've been so consumed with a certain project that we basically forgot the world. Above that, though, I see a man with passion, one who built a life and lived that life around what he wanted to do, and that was race motorcycles. He spent every bit of dinero he ever earned and every amount of time that he ever had towards chasing that goal. He was a man that lived and died by the sword, and one who reaped the most extreme side of both fortune and misfortune, and that showed in the Bultaco product. Because every bike Bultaco built was successful on the roads, in the dirt, on the track. These were solid machines made from hand, out of a barn on a shoestring budget with dated machinery equipment during a civil war in Spain. And that's impressive, since some motorcycle companies today with billions of dollars, high-tech robotic assembly lines, wind tunnel testing, sound rooms, 3D mock-up models, and a free enterprise can't accomplish what Bultaco could with a handful of engineers working from a bathroom 60 years ago. And there lies the belleza of Bultaco, and why after 40 plus years the name continues to live on. because it defines a time period when craftsmanship was a priority, when passion took precedence over money in most cases. And for those of you who are listening, who ever owned, seen, or ridden a Bultaco motorcycle, you can remember vividly what it felt like to ride that bike, because it was more than just a motorcycle. It was an experience, one that many of us can only hold on to through memory now because they don't make motorcycles like that anymore. And you know what else they don't make anymore? People like Francesco Javier Bulto. Adios.